Chapter 11. Ever since he awoke on the spaceship, Ransom had been thinking about the amazing adventure of going to another planet, and about his chances of returning from it. What he had not thought about was being on it. It was with a kind of stupefaction each morning that he found himself neither arriving in nor escaping from, but simply living on Malacandra. Waking, sleeping, eating, swimming, and even, as the days passed, talking. The wonder of it smote him most strongly when he found himself, about 3 weeks after his arrival, actually going for a walk. A few weeks later, he had his favourite walks, and his favourite foods. He was beginning to develop habits. He knew a male from a female Hross at sight, and even individual differences were becoming plain. Hyoi, who had first found him miles away to the north, was a very different person from the grey-muzzled, venerable Nora, who was daily teaching him the language. And the young of the species were different again. They were delightful. You could forget all about the rationality of Hrossa in dealing with them. Too young to trouble him with the baffling enigma of reason in an inhuman form, they solaced his loneliness, as if he had been allowed to bring a few dogs with him from Earth. The cubs, on their part, felt the liveliest interest in the hairless goblin which had appeared among them. With them, and therefore indirectly with their dams, he was a brilliant success. Of the community in general, his earlier impressions were all gradually being corrected. His first diagnosis of their culture was what he called Old Stone Age. The few cutting instruments they possessed were made of stone. They seemed to have no pottery, but a few clumsy vessels used for boiling, and boiling was the only cookery they attempted. Their common drink vessel, dish and ladle all in one, was the oyster-like shell in which he had first tasted Hross hospitality. The fish which it contained was their only animal food. Vegetable fare they had in great plenty and variety, some of it delicious. Even the pinkish-white weed which covered the whole Handramit was edible at a pinch, so that if he had starved before Hyoi found him, he would have starved amidst abundance. No Hross, however, ate the weed, Honodraskrud, for choice, though it might be used Furthdemir on a journey. Their dwellings were beehive-shaped huts of stiff leaf, and the villages, there were several in the neighbourhood, were always built beside rivers for warmth, and well upstream towards the walls of the Handramit, where the water was hottest. They slept on the ground. They seemed to have no arts except a kind of poetry and music, which was practised almost every evening by a team or troop of 4 Hrossa. One recited half-chanting at great length, while the other 3, sometimes singly, sometimes antiphonally, interrupted him from time to time with song. Ransom could not find out whether these interruptions were simply lyrical interludes or dramatic dialogue arising out of the leader's narrative. He could make nothing of the music. The voices were not disagreeable, and the scale seemed adapted to human ears, but the time pattern was meaningless to his sense of rhythm. The occupations of the tribe or family were at first mysterious. People were always disappearing for a few days and reappearing again. There was a little fishing and much journeying in boats of which he never discovered the object. Then one day he saw a kind of caravan of Hrossa setting out by land with a load of vegetable food on its head. Apparently there was some kind of trade in Malacandra. He discovered their agriculture in the first week. About a mile down the Handramit, one came to broad lands, free of forest, and clothed for many miles together in low, pulpy vegetation, in which yellow, orange, and blue predominated. Later on, there were lettuce-like plants about the height of a terrestrial birch tree. Where one of these overhung the warmth of water, you could step into one of the lower leaves and lie deliciously, as in a gently moving, fragrant hammock. Elsewhere it was not warm enough to sit still for long out of doors. The general temperature of the Handramit was that of a fine winter's morning on Earth. These food-producing areas were worked communally by the surrounding villagers, and his division of labour had been carried to a higher point than he expected. Cutting, drying, sorting, transport, and something like manuring were all carried on, and he suspected that some at least of the water channels were artificial. But the real revolution in his understanding of the Rossa began when he had learned enough of their language to attempt some satisfaction of their curiosity about him. In answer to their questions, he began by saying that he had come out of the sky. Honora immediately asked from which planet or earth, Handra. Ransom, who had deliberately given a childish version of the truth in order to adapt it to the supposed ignorance of his audience, was a little annoyed to find Honora painfully explaining to him that he could not live in the sky because there was no air in it. He might have come through the sky, but he must have come from a Handra. He was quite unable to point Earth out to them in the night sky. They seemed surprised at his inability, and repeatedly pointed out to him a bright planet low on the western horizon, a little south of where the sun had gone down. He was surprised that they selected a planet instead of a mere star, and stuck to their choice. Could it be possible that they understood astronomy? Unfortunately, he still knew too little of their language to explore their knowledge. He turned the conversation by asking them the name of the bright southern planet, and was told that it was Thalkandra, the silent world or planet. "Why do you call it Thalk?" he added. "Why silent?" No one knew.
"The Saroni know," said Honora. "That is the sort of thing they know."
Then he was asked how he had come, and made a very poor attempt at describing the spaceship, but again,
"The Saroni would know."
Had he come alone? No, he had come with 2 others of his kind, bad men. Bent men was the nearest Hrossian equivalent, who tried to kill him, but he had run away from them. The Hrossa found this difficult, but all finally agreed that he ought to go to Oyasa. Oyasa would protect him. Ransom asked who Oyasa was. Slowly, and with many misunderstandings, he hammered out the information that Oyasa, 1, lived in Meldalorn, 2, knew everything and ruled everyone, 3, had always been there, and 4, was not a Hross, nor one of the Saroni. Then Ransom, following his own idea, asked if Oyasa had made the world. The Hrossa almost barked in the fervour of their denial. Did people in Thalkandra not know that Mal-Eldil, the young, had made and still ruled the world? Even a child knew that. Where did Mal-Eldil live? Ransom asked.
With the Old One.
And who was the Old One? Ransom did not understand the answer. He tried again. Where was the Old One?
He is not that sort, said Honora, that he has to live anywhere,
and proceeded to a good deal which Ransom did not follow, but he followed enough to feel once more a certain irritation. Ever since he had discovered the rationality of the Hrossa, he had been haunted by a conscientious scruple as to whether it might not be his duty to undertake their religious instruction. Now, as a result of his tentative efforts, he found himself being treated as if he were the savage, and being given a first sketch of civilized religion, a sort of Hrossian equivalent of the Shorter Catechism. It became plain that Mal-Eldil was a spirit without body, parts, or passions.
He is not now,
said the Hrossa. What is now? Asked Ransom.
You are now. I am now. The Saroni are now. The Pliffletriggy are now.
Pliffletriggy? Said Ransom.
More than 10 days' journey to the west,
said Honora.
The Harandra sinks down not into a handramit, but into a broad place, an open place, spreading every way. 5 days' journey from the north to the south of it, 10 days' journey from the east to the west. The forests are of other colours there than here. They are blue and green. It is very deep there. It goes to the roots of the world. The best things that can be dug out of the earth are there. The Fliffeltriggy live there. They delight in digging. What they dig they soften with fire and make things of it. They are little people, smaller than you, long in the snout, pale, busy. They have long limbs in front. No now can match them in making and shaping things, as none can match us in singing. But let man see.
He turned and spoke to one of the younger Hrossa, and presently passed from hand to hand. There came to him a little bowl. He held it close to the firelight and examined it. It was certainly of gold, and Ransom realized the meaning of Devine's interest in Malacandra. "Is there much of this thing?" he asked. Yes, he was told. It was washed down in most of the rivers, but the best and most was among the Fliffeltriggy. And it was they who were skilled in it. Arbul Hr, they called it, sun's blood. He looked at the bowl again. It was covered with fine etching. He saw pictures of Hrossa, and of smaller, almost frog-like animals, and then Sorns. He pointed to the latter inquiringly.
Serani,
said the Hrossa, confirming his suspicions.
They live up almost on the Harandra, in the big caves.
The frog-like animals, or taper-headed, frog-bodied animals, were the Fliffeltriggy. Ransom turned it over in his mind. On Malacandra, apparently 3 distinct species had reached rationality, and none of them had yet exterminated the other 2. It concerned him intensely to find out which was the real master. "Which of the Hanau rule?" he asked.
Oyasa rules,
was the reply. "Is he now?" This puzzled them a little. The Saroni, they thought, would be better at that kind of question. Perhaps Oyasa was Hanau, but a very different Hanau. He had no death and no young. "The Saroni know more than the Hrossa?" asked Ransom. This produced more a debate than an answer. What emerged finally was the Saroni or Sorns were perfectly helpless in a boat, and could not fish to save their lives, could hardly swim, could make no poetry, and even when Hrossa had made it for them, could understand only the inferior sorts. But they were admittedly good at finding out things about the stars, and understanding the darker utterances of Oyasa, and telling what had happened in Malacandra long ago, longer ago than anyone could remember. Ah, the intelligentsia, thought Ransom. They must be the real rulers, however it is disguised. He tried to ask what would happen if the Sorns used their wisdom to make the Hrossa do things. This was as far as he could get in his halting Malacandrian. The question did not sound nearly so urgent in this form as it would have done if he had been able to say, used their scientific resources for the exploitation of their uncivilized neighbours. But he might have spared his pains. The mention of the Sorns' inadequate appreciation of poetry had diverted the whole conversation into literary channels. Of the heated and apparently technical discussion which followed, he understood not a syllable. Naturally, his conversations with the Hrossa did not all turn on Malacandra. He had to repay them with information about Earth. He was hampered in this both by the humiliating discoveries which he was constantly making of his own ignorance about his native planet, and partly by his determination to conceal some of the truth. He did not want to tell them too much of our human wars and industrialisms. He remembered how H.G. Wells's Caver had met his end on the moon. Also, he felt shy. A sensation akin to that of physical nakedness came over him whenever they questioned him too closely about men. The mana, as they called them. Moreover, he was determined not to let them know that he had been brought here to be given to the Sorns, for he was becoming daily more certain that these were the dominant species. What he did tell them fired the imagination of the Hrossa. They all began making poems about the strange Handra, where the plants were hard like stone and the earthweed green like rock, and the waters cold and salt, and Hamana lived on top, on the Harandra. They were even more interested in what he had to tell them of the aquatic animal with snapping jaws which he had fled from in their own world, and even in their own Handramit. It was a Nakhra, they all agreed. They were intensely excited. There had not been a Hanakhra in the valley for many years. The youth of the Harossa got out their weapons, primitive harpoons with points of bone, and the very cubs began playing at Hanakhra hunting in the shallows. Some of the mothers showed signs of anxiety and wanted the cubs to be kept out of the water, but in general the news of the Hanakhra seemed to be immensely popular. Hoyoi set off at once to do something to his boat, and Ransom accompanied him. He wished to make himself useful, and was already beginning to have some vague capacity with the primitive Harossian tools. They walked together to Hoyoi's Creek, a stone's throw through the forest. On the way, where the path was single and Ransom was following Hoyoi, they passed a little she-Haross, not much more than a cub. She spoke as they passed, but not to them. Her eyes were on a spot about 5 yards away. "Who do you speak to, Hriki?" said Ransom. "To the Eldil." "Where?" "Did you not see him?" "I saw nothing." "There! There!" she cried suddenly. "Ah, he is gone. Did you not see him?" "I saw no one." "Hoyoi," said the cub. "The man cannot see the Eldil." But Hoyoi, continuing steadily on his way, was already out of earshot, and had apparently noticed nothing. Ransom concluded that Hriki was pretending, like the young of his own species. In a few moments he rejoined his companion.